Hi everyone, welcome back to our third episode. This is Departure from Reality, and today we're going to be talking about The Two Towers, book 2 in the Lord of the Rings series by JRR Tolkien.
Yes, we are very excited to discuss this. We know that it was a heavily anticipated episode. Everyone was like, why aren't you continuing with the next episode? So here we are.
Yeah, heavily anticipated from our 7 listeners.
Excuse me, our first episode has 30 views-ish on YouTube.
30 views-ish.
I can't remember the number.
Well, regardless, thank you to everyone who's been listening, and we hope you guys enjoy this one. All right, episode 3, Two Towers.
Yes, I'm so glad that we were back to Lord of the Rings.
We're still trying to figure this whole podcasting thing out. We thought maybe it would be a good idea to diversify our first few episodes and get a few different stories out there, Lord of the Rings and Stormlight, but We're kind of getting the feeling that maybe we should have just focused directly on Lord of the Rings and gotten those ones done and out of the way and moved on from there.
Yes, What we have noticed is that it is hard to get into a certain mind frame. So we were in the Lord of the Rings mind frame, and we should have stuck with that, because then we had to try and get ourselves back into
the right headspace.
Yes, for this episode. So that's kind of why there's long pauses, because it's not as easy when you're forcing yourself to get into a certain headspace and a certain desire to want to be back into these stories.
Yeah, I mean, don't get it twisted. We love these stories.
We do.
To actually sit down and talk about it for an hour to an hour and a half, you need the right headspace. You need to be prepared to talk about it.
Yeah, and at the same time, we still have movies and TV shows and books that we are currently enjoying, and our headspace is kind of right there sometimes. So it's just, we're trying to do better for you guys to make them come out a little faster.
We're trying to figure out a more organic way to schedule which series or book or whatever we're going to be talking about next to make sure that our headspace lines up with our recording. So.
Yes, so that way we can try and get episodes out just a little faster.
We're working on it.
We'll get there eventually, so just hang with us. We appreciate it.
All right, Two Towers. In our first episode, we kind of ran out of time and didn't get to discuss one of the best characters, played by one of the best actors in the entire trilogy.
Yes.
That being Saruman.
Yep.
And
Christopher Lee, oh my goodness.
He's phenomenal.
Right?
Oh my gosh. The stories from him just on the set of Lord of the Rings alone, I love it. I love hearing about all that stuff. And I love how much of a Tolkien nerd he was.
When I was a teenager, I read an article about how every single year he would read the entire trilogy. It was like this annual thing for him. It made me love him even more as an actor and a character. And I was only a teenager at the time, but I still I was like, oh my gosh, I was in awe of this man who, I mean, yes, he did it for himself, but I think it really helped him with his role.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm pretty sure out of all the actors in the film, he was the oldest one during the recording process.
Yeah.
He was 79 when the first movie came out.
Yeah.
I mean, holy cow.
But he doesn't really show it. Not saying that you're 79 and you're crippled and you're not going to be able to do walking very well, but the energy that he brought to the character of Saruman, you wouldn't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you don't see Saruman and think a feeble old man. At least not until the third movie when he's at the top of the tower, Orthanc, and he's all defeated. But I mean, that's kind of the impression they're trying to give anyway. Yeah, before that, he doesn't give off the air of just a sad old man. He's a powerful wizard.
Right?
Oh, he does such a good job.
He really does. Well, speaking of him being at the top of the tower at the end, you were telling me a story when the last time we watched it, and I think you should share this.
This is technically Return of the King territory, but since we're talking about Saruman, let's just talk about it.
Yep.
I'm sure some of you guys have seen this behind-the-scenes clip of Christopher Lee and Peter Jackson sort of discussing that scene when a Wormtongue stabs Saruman in the back and kills him.
Mm-hmm.
And Peter Jackson was originally giving notes to Christopher Lee on how he wanted the scene done, and he was telling him, when you get stabbed, I want you to sort of scream out ah! And Christopher Lee's like, but that's not what happens when someone gets stabbed in the back. And Peter Jackson's like, I'm sorry, what? Yeah, because it turns out Christopher Lee was a friggin' spy during World War II. And this man has most likely killed people.
Not just killed, but stabbed them in the back.
Yeah. Peter Jackson said in an interview that during Christopher Lee's explanation of what sound a person makes when they get stabbed in the back, he described, his words, a very clandestine part of World War II. So he straight up told him a war story to explain how he understands what happens when someone gets stabbed in the back.
Yeah.
And it's little things like that. This man has some crazy stories, some crazy world experience. And the fact that he brought that into his portrayal of Saruman and just the work on the set of Lord of the Rings. I love it so much.
Right? This man has lived a crazy life.
Really has. And I'm pretty sure that Ian Fleming is actually cousins to Christopher Lee,
Yeah.
the author of the 007 books. A lot of people speculate that the character, James Bond, is actually based on Christopher Lee. Like, this man is actually 007.
I mean, that's crazy. So you think they're sitting around at like family reunions and he's like, tell me more about your time in World War II. And he's like, I got a story for you. And so he just like, takes out his notebook and he's going to make a great story for 007.
I mean, I would imagine like he would have had to hear a couple stories before it sunk in. Like, wait a minute, I need to be writing this down.
Right.
Like, to be in the room when Ian Fleming gets the idea of 007 while talking to Christopher Lee,
Right.
like just a fly on the wall in that situation, just to watch the genesis of this character take place.
Mm-hmm.
I would love that. It's so fun to think about.
Yeah, the man is amazing, but the character is pretty intense himself.
He is.
He's basically the leader of all the wizards around Middle Earth.
Yeah, and the council with him, Gandalf, Galadriel, and Elrond. He's the leader of that council as well.
Yeah,
I don't remember the name of the council.
But he's this strong, powerful wizard, and he's not only just strong, but he's supposed to be wise. And here he is. He's become manipulated by Sauron. And I don't know if that shows how weak Saruman has become or how strong a manipulator Sauron himself is.
I mean, a bit of both, I would assume.
I mean, probably, but I mean, how naive does a person have to be to believe that if I help Sauron in this, he's going to share his power with me? I'm going to be just as important as him. I'm watching it this time and I'm like, are you really this naive? Are you really this deluded?
I mean, Saruman, even before he decided to join with Sauron, he was very power hungry. I mean, during the events of The Hobbit, there's the whole story of the necromancer, and we don't learn that that's Sauron until much later.
Yeah.
Saruman actually goes to help fight off the necromancer because if it is actually Sauron, he doesn't want Sauron to return to power at that time because he himself is looking for the ring because he thinks that the ring would give him power. It's not until after that.
So he's already like kind of turning at this point.
Yeah. But he hadn't quite joined up with Sauron at that point. He probably deluded himself into thinking that his quest for greater power was for the greater good.
Yeah.
And maybe even at the end when he gets turned by Sauron, convinces himself that it's for the greater good. I mean, he kind of says as much to Gandalf when he says, what hope do we have against the power of Mordor? He was very power hungry. And I think Sauron, being as clever a manipulator as he was, preyed on that.
Yeah.
Offered him power and made it seem like he would share power. And who knows? Because obviously we don't get to see a world where Sauron wins and Saruman joins him. Maybe he would have shared, but obviously
I don't see that happening.
I don't think it would have been like the two of them sitting on thrones side by side.
Right.
But I think Sauron would have taken pleasure in subjugating Saruman, making him like an underling.
Yeah.
I mean, we already know the Balrogs are basically the same thing as the wizards.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe he would have done something to turn him into some sort of dark creature after he'd won.
Hey, maybe you're right. I didn't even think of that. I just figured as soon as he got his ring back, no matter what had happened to Saruman, if he was still alive, like, I feel like you're toast. Like, thank you for your help and goodbye.
Maybe, but Sauron's clever. Thinking about it from Sauron's perspective, if he were to succeed, get the ring back, Middle-earth's done. Mm-hmm. It's just done. But Middle-earth's not the end-all be-all, because then we've got the Valar out there, and we've got the Grey Havens, which, I mean, technically at this point, I'm pretty sure been lifted up, so they're not necessarily on Middle-earth anymore. I would assume, after basically subjugating the entire planet, his next target would be the Valar themselves, and so having a weapon like Saruman in your tool belt, that could be pretty useful.
Yeah.
It's fun to speculate about, though, like what Sauron might have done if he'd won. But who knows?
Exactly. Who really knows?
Yeah. Speaking of Saruman getting manipulated, though, I think it's fascinating that, well, first of all, I mean, it was done through the use of the Palantirs. Sauron has a Palantir that he uses to see out into Middle-earth, and they're able to communicate with each other. So Saruman, with his Palantir, is able to talk with Sauron. But there's someone else who has a Palantir, and that's Denethor in Gondor. And I find it fascinating that apparently Denethor didn't actually fall prey to Sauron's manipulations.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, Sauron tried the exact same thing. I mean, he had access to Denethor just like he did with Saruman. But between the two, Saruman caved and said, yeah, I'll work with you, buddy. But
I mean, the backstory you just told me about how he himself was already searching for the ring because he was power hungry. Denethor, I think he was content with who he was as the steward of Gondor to begin with.
It's true.
Well, Saruman himself was not content with the power he had. He wanted more. And Denethor, like every person in Gondor, was raised with this hate towards Mordor. You know, since they were children, they were raised with this hate and this, we have to protect Middle Earth from the orcs and the forces of Mordor.
Yeah.
So it kind of makes a little sense when you think about it, but at the same time, he was a man.
Yeah.
So it is kind of crazy that he didn't.
Yeah. At the end of the day, he had a somewhat stronger level of willpower
Yeah.
than Saruman. But I'm pretty sure, even though he didn't believe Sauron's promises and join Sauron, I think it's basically implied, at least in the books, that the use of the Palantir is partially what made Denethor go a little bit crazy, which kind of explains a bit. But at the same time, like, I kind of like that they don't touch on that in the movies, and it's just kind of left up to our imagination what kind of person Denethor's been his whole life. And with his treatment of Boromir and Faramir, we're kind of left thinking, I think he's just a favorites having douchebag of a father.
Right.
And so I like that that's what they did for the movies.
I do too. But while we're on the topic of those who have been manipulated by Sauron's power, I want to switch to Gollum.
Okay.
This is a character I think everybody loves.
Depends on the type of love you're talking about. He's a good character.
As a character in the story, not like, oh my gosh, that Gollum. Like, he's just got so much to him.
Yeah.
Like,
although I'm sure there are people out there who
and
feel
that's
that
fine.
way.
That's fair. But as a character, he's so good.
Yeah.
And the scene where Smeagol banishes Gollum and chooses to help Frodo, that's one that's just, it's always stood out in my mind to me.
Yeah.
I love it. It was such a good way to show that there are two personalities living within him. And the madness that the ring drove him to, it really hits home with this scene.
Yeah, it's such a clever scene. Because, I mean, we spend, I think, the first half of the movie up to that point just seeing Smeagol/Gollum walking around saying nonsense. And average viewer, you're watching and you can kind of get the idea. This dude's messed up.
Oh, yeah.
But it's like you said, that scene really does nail home that there are two personalities here. He's talking to a different version of himself. And it's so very cleverly written.
Right?
And very cleverly acted. It's so good.
Yes, I love it so much.
If I'm remembering the behind-the-scenes clip properly, or maybe it was like an interview, I don't remember, but Peter Jackson said that they were trying to come up with a way to get that point across, that it was two people inside this one person, and they didn't really have any time to budget that shot into their schedule.
Yeah.
And so Fran Walsh, one of the three writers, Peter Jackson, Fran Walsh, and Philippa something, she took basically the initiative and just wrote that scene out. And Peter Jackson loved it and said, perfect, take a camera, take Andy Serkis, and go film it. That's all they really needed.
And she killed it. She killed it.
Yeah, such a good scene.
I was kind of wondering myself, with these two personalities that he has living within him, was this his brain's way of maybe coping with what he has done under the influence of the ring? Like, maybe this is his brain's way to protect himself. Like, we'll create the personality of Gollum to take on the blame. I don't know. I was just thinking about it.
Yeah, no, it's kind of an interesting thing to speculate on, though. Like, when did the alter ego appear? Was it after spending a single lifetime with the ring, two lifetimes with the ring? Was it because of the ring? Was it because the ring was making him live longer than he should? And so the side effect of being several hundred years old when he should have died a long time ago, is this a side effect of that? Or we know that he killed someone when he got the ring and then he was cast out by his family.
Yeah.
Is this a side effect of that? Did it happen that early on?
They kind of are two personalities, two people living within him. So is Gollum the power of the ring, like, manifested inside of Smeagol?
I don't know. I mean, it definitely feels isolated. Like, it feels like something that, I mean, I would guess, I don't know for sure, but I would guess that Gollum is purely Smeagol. It's all him. Whether that came about because of the ring, because of his old age, because he killed someone and then was banished, I don't know. We could even speculate maybe he had some sort of mental illness, split personalities before he even encountered the ring. Maybe he was just that kind of person. Who knows? But it's fun to speculate on, though.
It is. And it's such a good scene. And just his happiness afterwards, where he's like, Smeagol's free. You know?
Yeah.
Just that pure happiness and excitement that maybe even after all this time, I do get to start over too.
Yeah, there is like a good stretch of the film where it feels like he's a different person. Like things are looking up. It's kind of interesting to think of Gollum, Smeagol, bringing some sort of like light to the story. But he kind of does for a brief moment because we have a little bit of hope for him. And that's really interesting. That's a clever thing to do with a character that's so dark, just
Right?
inherently, to be able to have any moment where that character brings like a tiny bit of hope and warmth to the viewer.
And I mean, you can see a little bit of that when he brings Frodo the rabbit to eat, and like it's kind of gross. It's not cooked, but Gollum doesn't think that way. He eats everything raw anyway, so
it's his love language.
Exactly. Yes, he could see that Frodo himself is not doing well, and he's like, he's dragged down. There's no way he can go and chase this rabbit himself.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna bring it to him, and it's just so sweet.
Yeah, and Sam, who I love, just kind of stomps all over that.
Yes, he does.
Like
you can hear him screeching in the background.
Yeah, he's cooking the rabbits.
Yes.
Ah! It's so good.
Yes, because in his mind, that was really going to help Frodo. That raw rabbit was really going to help him.
Yep. Just ruining it.
And then
Stupid fat hobbit.
Stupid fat hobbit. But then the Rangers, they capture Gollum, and in Gollum's mind, that's a betrayal from Frodo, even though in reality he doesn't realize that Frodo is actually saving his life.
Yeah, and I think for most characters, you could make the argument like that is such a large logical leap to blame Frodo for what happened to him. Like Frodo even tried to help, but not that sophisticated a thinker.
No,
I mean, he has moments where he's devious, but he's not stringing pieces together that a normal person would. And so seeing Frodo there lure him out just before he gets caught, that's stamped and sealed and shipped. I mean,
exactly.
He thinks Frodo betrayed him at that point.
Yes,
so.
He decided to banish Gollum for Frodo, basically. And then here he is with these Rangers who are beating him.
Yes, me go.
Oh my gosh, that scene is so creepy.
Yes, the crying, then just frozen motion as he switches to Gollum. Smeagol. So well acted. I love Andy Serkis.
Right?
Speaking of Andy Serkis, some of the things he did in this movie were insane. We obviously don't get that just watching the movie because we can't exactly see what they did to film some of these scenes. You remember that moment in the second movie when it shows Frodo, Sam, and Gollum, and they're all just walking through this little like glen, and it shows Gollum chasing a fish down a little creek.
Yeah.
And he's straight up in the water, splashing around, trying to catch the thing. Apparently, to film that shot, that entire hillside was covered in snow and the creek was frozen. And they had to bring in, because I mean they were planning to shoot here. They'd already chosen this spot months ago, and they come in and it's covered in snow, creek's frozen, and they're like, well, what do we do now? They had to bring in a bunch of industrial-sized fans to melt the ice, thaw the snow, just to clear it all out. And then, even though it was basically freezing water, Andy Serkis splashed around in the freaking water to get the shot.
Yeah.
I mean, he's straight up in frozen water, like risking hypothermia.
Right?
To get the shot. Like, the man is insane. He's dedicated as hell. And just
yes, he is.
Such a good shot, too.
And I appreciate him so much for everything he did for this movie.
He really sacrificed his body, his throat, with all the Gollum.
Right?
Could you imagine, like, the honey drinks he had to have each day just to keep his throat from getting all raspy?
Yeah, he's amazing. Well, in the first episode, I remember us talking a little bit about how these films are 20 plus years old now. And we talked about how well they have held up over time. And I still stand by that. They really have held up well over time. But while I was rewatching this episode, and this is actually the first time I've rewatched it on my newer TV, so maybe this plays a part in it. But I was like, oh, Gollum has not aged well.
Yeah. And it's almost immediate, too. Like, one of the first shots with Gollum in the second movie, because we don't really get a good look at him in the first movie, but second movie, that's when we start to see, like, the fully animated Gollum.
Yeah.
And I think it's right after the little scuffle that he has with Frodo and Sam, and they put the elven rope around his neck. And he's just standing there, and it looks like something has been CG'd on top of a shot of these rocks.
Yes!
And it feels so strange, because so much of the movie holds up so well.
It really does. And so, yeah, it kind of felt out of place with everything. And I was like, I don't remember, because the last time I saw this, you and I watched it last summer on your guys' projector, which at the time we were projecting onto a sheet. So, of course, I wasn't going to exactly notice the difference. But then I put it up on my brand new TV and I'm like, oh, wow. Yeah, no, I think I spoke a little too soon in the last episode when I said it's held up so well. But no, it really has. It's just Gollum.
Yeah, for the most part, it really has. But I would assume there are other moments of CG usage
I'm sure there are.
Feel a little bit dated, which kind of makes me want to remaster them a little bit and just touch up the CG. Like, if that's all they did, I would love that.
I mean, if that's all they did, I would love it too. But maybe while they're at it, they can just create a new series for us with all of their extra footage.
That would be amazing.
Right?
I have heard all the rumors that they've got like all this extra footage.
Yeah, I've heard that too.
Filming. That would be phenomenal.
I mean, I am very grateful for the extended versions. Like, that's all
Yes.
I watch anymore. Since they've come out, I haven't even just sat and watched the theatrical version. But for one movie, I would sit and watch a super duper extended version.
Yeah, some sort of definitive edition.
Right? Yes.
That would be phenomenal. I can't even imagine what an extra 3 hours of content on any one of those movies would be,
Mm-hmm.
but I want it.
Yes. I would even take 30 extra minutes of
Yes.
footage. Just, like, give me some more. Like, I need more of Middle-earth, please.
Yes.
And I'm not talking about the Rings of Power and all that. I'm talking about these 3 movies. I need more Middle-earth.
It would be so good.
And I would definitely go see it in theaters. Like, if he's like, oh, we're just going to re-release it in theaters, you know, try and make some more money, totally cool, and I would see it. But if we're going to have that long of a movie, we're going to need to have a few intermissions.
Yeah.
Since we can't just sit and pause it on our couches.
Could you imagine? 6-hour long movie sitting in the theater. They'd need to have at least 2 intermissions.
At least, because I'm not going to want to get up, because what if I miss another scene that I haven't seen before? You know,
Yeah.
What if they just pop one in right here and I miss it completely? Like,
Yep.
oh my gosh, I'd be so upset.
Those would have to be like deluxe price tickets as well.
Yes.
Like, I wouldn't begrudge the movie theaters for charging maybe even like
Nope.
double the price of a normal ticket. You're seeing basically 3 movies back to back to back
Right?
for the price of a single movie.
They could make this like a whole experience too. Like
Mm.
during intermission, we're going to sell lunch now.
Yeah, that would be
I mean,
awesome.
you started at 9 a.m, but now it's lunchtime.
We need to
so-
get in contact with Peter Jackson and every theater here in Vegas.
Yes.
Just-
And this would be great. We're all having to take an intermission at the same time
Mhm.
because, like, you know, say I need to go to the bathroom and you don't, but we're at home watching this movie. And like, you know, I want to pause it, but what if you don't? I'm just, you know, I'm going to tell you, don't worry about it. Don't pause it.
We've talked about this in the past. It's been a minute, but you know that feeling you get when you're
Mhm.
watching something with someone and it's something you love
Yeah.
and that person gets up to go to the restroom.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, want me to pause it? And they say no.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't it hurt just a little bit?
It really does. Like, this is an experience we are sharing, and you don't want me to pause this
It's like,
movie?
oh, so you hate me then? Okay. You'd rather just go hang out in the bathroom while I watch this alone. Okay. Thought we were having a moment.
So most recently when this happened, you were showing me this TV show on Netflix that you like called Arcane.
Mm.
We only had time to watch the first 3 episodes, but I had never seen this before, and I had a lot of questions.
Mhm.
You had to go to the bathroom, and you're like, and I was like, do you want me to pause it? And you're like, no, don't worry about it. And I'm sitting there the whole time watching it. I haven't paused it yet, but in my mind, I'm like, why doesn't he want me to pause? Like, what if I have a question? Like, this feels
Yeah.
different now. This is a different experience than it was before. And I'm not catching anything, but you come back and I don't say anything and we don't skip back. And I miss probably a good 5-10 minutes of the show. And yeah, so I'm just going to pause from now on.
Yeah. Again, I've been on both sides. I've been the person who said, don't worry, just keep it playing. And I've been the person who said, do you want me to pause it?
Yeah.
And as someone who goes to the restroom and says, don't pause it,
Mm-hmm.
my whole thing is I feel bad making you pause the movie when I've already seen it, or the show that when I've already seen it. Like, no, I've seen it. I'll know where you're at. So
Mhm.
just don't worry about it. But I think the perspective of the person sitting there waiting to come back should probably take precedent. Like, if that person is uncomfortable with it not being paused,
Yeah.
then it should be paused.
But I mean, going back to our definitive extended edition talk, it doesn't even have to be a movie. What if they released it in like this limited series for each
Oh,
episode?
like a miniseries.
Yeah, like 3 or 4 episodes where we just get some extended stuff. I
That
don't
would
know.
be amazing.
Right?
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And while they're at it, they need to remaster Gollum. I'm sure they've got all that footage of him in like that green suit slipping down the river and everything. Like they could just remaster it with the new technology.
Yeah, they could remaster basically all the scenes that use big CG. Presumably, they have all that raw footage.
Mm-hmm.
Using modern technology, they could make all those scenes feel fresh and new and more alive than they were even before. Which
Mhm.
isn't to say that they didn't feel alive before. Those scenes blew us all away. And
Oh,
I'm talking about
completely.
like the Battle of Pelennor Fields, the 10,000 orcs at Helm's Deep, all that stuff. Phenomenal. But to make it modern and make it feel just as good on modern day technology as it did back then, I would love that.
I would too. But I kind of get worried that years ago, they re-released Star Wars, like remastered when we were kids.
Not just years ago. They did it a bunch of times.
They did do it a bunch of times, but there is one
Lucas.
specific one I'm talking about. Like, the first time they did it, George Lucas was given this new technology, and he's like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And while it is amazing, absolutely, you should be very careful of the power you are wielding there because you can destroy a film. So as long as Peter Jackson doesn't George Lucas's film, have at it, man. Enjoy the new technology.
Go in and touch things up, but don't add 1,000 new things to a shot that weren't there last time you sent the film out.
Mm-hmm.
Don't change scenes like frickin' Han and Greedo, who shot first.
Yep.
That's a recipe for disaster when it comes to the fan reception. If it ever happens, which I don't want to be a spoil sport, but it kind of feels like it won't.
I'm sure it won't, but it's fun to talk about.
If it ever happens, crossing our fingers that he doesn't pull a George Lucas.
Yes, absolutely.
All right. So there's a scene I kind of want to talk about real quick from the movies, and that is the scene when Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli find Gandalf in Fangorn. The last time I watched it, I kind of interpreted Viggo's performance in that scene way different than I have before, and I've seen this movie countless times.
Mm-hmm.
As I was watching it, I'm watching how the three of them react when they realize that who they're staring at is Gandalf, and Legolas and Gimli, they're kind of awestruck, and I think they kneel even. I mean, who wouldn't in that situation? It's totally fair. This big glowing figure is standing in front of them.
A figure they saw fall in Moria and
presumably die,
exactly.
Yeah. So it's totally a fair reaction, but Aragorn doesn't kneel.
Yeah.
Not to imply some sort of like he's a man who doesn't kneel type of deal. Like, not to imply that, but that's not his mind space when he sees Gandalf and he starts to piece things together. The portrayal from Viggo, his facial expression, his tone of voice, he says, what's the first thing he says?
I saw you fall.
Yes, he says, I saw you fall. The look on his face, he almost looks betrayed in a way. Like hurt.
Yes.
Like
if you were alive this whole time, where have you been?
Exactly. Like, what is going on right now? He's just beyond confused and potentially just hurting inside. And I think that's something that we don't, or at least I haven't, ever fully considered when watching that scene, because it's not something they touch on a lot in the film. But Aragorn and Gandalf were pretty close friends. I mean, they knew each other for quite a bit before all that. So to see someone that you watched die, you know for certainty within your understanding of the world and how things work, you know that this person is dead and he sacrificed himself for you and your friends to carry on with this mission. And then to see him again and realize he's not dead, that he's alive and in front of you, no wonder that he looks hurt and betrayed. I mean, he almost wonders if maybe he's been tricked in a way. Who knows what's going on in Aragorn's mind beyond just the raw emotion that we're able to pick up from Viggo's portrayal. It's an aspect of that scene that I'd never considered before.
And I hadn't either until you pointed it out to me. I was like, oh my goodness, you're right. The contrast between Legolas and Gimli, who kneel down and like, yay!
Yeah.
And like Aragorn, you can see the hurt on Viggo's face too. Like how he portrays this scene. I saw you fall.
Yep, I love it. I love it so much. Just such simple ways to create massive depth in character moments. I love it so much.
And then Ian McKellen, when he starts to describe what happened after he fell, I don't know, but I love the look on his face. It's almost like a little bit of sadness, maybe. We talked about it a little bit in our last Lord of the Rings episode, how Gandalf has changed a little bit because he's so much older now. Like, so much time has actually passed for him compared to everybody else. And I'm kind of wondering if it's a little bit of regret for what happened, because he's thinking back to it and how much time has actually passed where he could have been here helping them. But I don't know, his face looks a little sad as he starts to describe what happened between him and the Balrog before we have that like cut scene.
Yeah. Ian McKellen is such a good actor. Before I started rewatching the series, this most recent time, I watched this video where someone kind of broke down Ian McKellen and his acting style.
Yeah.
For The Lord of the Rings in particular, he pointed out that Peter Jackson made use of the perfect control that he has over his face by giving more close-ups to Gandalf than basically any other character. The number of times the camera is close up on Gandalf's face, it's insane. And it's done on purpose, not because of the character, but because of the actor.
Yeah.
Because Ian McKellen can tell you a full story with just his facial expression.
Yes, he can, and it's amazing. And I remember watching this scene for the first time. I had already read the book before this movie had come out, so I knew that Gandalf himself wasn't exactly dead. You know, he didn't exactly die like we thought he did. But just this scene, I remember feeling so emotional in the theater watching this as a 15-year-old. Just the actors, the level of emotion they brought to this scene. You can feel it. the facial expressions on Ian McKellen's face. It's just everything is so, I don't know. There's not even really a word for it. You could just feel it, and I felt it.
Yeah, it's a really raw emotional moment. At the same time, very subtle because it's brief. We get Viggo's emotion. We get the emotion from Gandalf while he's telling his story. And then it kind of passes pretty quickly because at that point, they realize that there are things to do and we need to keep moving. So it is very brief and very subtle, but they nail it in that scene. It's in terms of a character returning from the dead, it's, I think, handled and portrayed very, very well.
And this is like the first time we get to really see that Gandalf has actually changed. When Gimli goes, Gandalf, and he's like, Gandalf? And he's remembering, oh, I was called Gandalf, but he's like, I am Saruman, or rather Saruman as he should have been.
Yeah. They don't really touch too much on the whole colors system with the Istari and the wizards. It's kind of implied, now that he's Gandalf the White, he's on the same level as Saruman, and the whole I am Saruman as he should have been, again, implies that he's kind of stepping up to take some sort of role from Saruman to fill a void that Saruman left. While there is a lot more depth to that from the books, they don't need that from the movies. They give just enough context, just enough information to keep everyone sort of on the same page and realize Gandalf's basically leveled up in a way.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much all there is to it. He nearly died and dude got a whole bunch of XP.
Yeah, exactly.
But more than just his robe being different, his hair and staff being different, this really is a different person in a sense.
Yeah, I mean, this is a no-nonsense Gandalf. What does Gimli say? The new Gandalf's more grumpy than the old one?
Yes. It's interesting to see the differences between the two. And I think in an interview, Ian McKellen said that he preferred playing Gandalf the Grey to Gandalf the White because Gandalf the Grey, generally, he's a more sensitive character, more emotional moments with Gandalf the Grey than with Gandalf the White, and he's just a bit more fun than Gandalf the White. He can be silly, whereas Gandalf the White, he really is no nonsense.
Yeah.
There's very few moments where you could claim that Gandalf the White did or said something that could be considered silly.
It reminds me of in Doctor Who when we changed doctors from Matt Smith to Peter Capaldi and the vast difference between the personalities. We have, Matt Smith who's he's fun and just carefree and he loves everybody and you can just tell there's so much love from him. And then we go to Peter Capaldi who's like, I don't want to be touched, don't hug me. And we just need to get stuff done now. Let's just go, So I don't know. I was just thinking about that as I watched it. The similarities between the personality changes is kind of similar to how a doctor in Doctor Who, their personality changes.
Yeah, in Doctor Who, it's a bit more in your face that these are two different people.
Yes, because you actually get a different character or actor.
Yep. I think it's a little harder from the viewer's perspective to fully bring that home internally, that these are two different characters. I mean, it's still Gandalf. It's still Ian McKellen.
Exactly, yeah.
It's a more subtle transition because he is the same, but he's different. And it feels strange to say because as Gandalf the Grey, he's kind of already really old, but as Gandalf the White, he's much older. So he has, in a way, grown up. What happened to him after he killed the Balrog, he sort of drifted off, presumably dying and sort of returning to the Valar, I would guess. Each moment became as long as a life age of the earth or something like that. And I mean, who knows what he defined a moment as at that point, but a life age, presumably experiencing multiple life ages of the earth.
Who wouldn't change after that much time?
Yeah. Knowing that he was now sent back to finish his task, basically, taking up the role of the White, filling the shoes that Saruman has left. I'm pretty sure, from what I've heard and read, that when the 5 wizards were sent to Middle-earth, Gandalf was basically set up to be the leader of the wizards.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's something he turned down. He didn't want that power.
Yeah, and so Saruman, being very naturally power-hungry, stepped up and took it.
And I wonder if the personality change that he's kind of experiencing now, being a little more serious and no hesitation and just, we need to go now, we need to act now, is maybe a little regret on his part for not taking up the mantle of the White when he was first offered it, because, look where it's gotten us now.
I think to try and compare it to something more on our level, I would compare it more to thinking about something that we personally just don't want to do. There are plenty of things that I just don't want to do, but then it comes to a breaking point where I just need to do that thing. And when I go do that thing, I'm not happy, fun, a joy to be around Kyle. I'm very focused and I want to get this shit done,
yes,
Kyle.
I've put it off for long enough. Yeah. Just get it done already.
And I think that's the tone that Gandalf the White has a lot of the time.
That's fair.
Yeah.
I actually like that a little bit better.
That's the feeling I get.
Yeah. So there's this part as they're headed to Rohan where it's nighttime and I assume everybody else is like asleep. But Gandalf and Aragorn are talking, and they're talking about stuff that's going on. You guys know this scene. I don't need to like break it down for you. But there's this part where Gandalf is shocked but pleased to find out that Sam went with Frodo.
Yeah.
And up until this point, he thought that Frodo was on his own. And in my mind, up until this part, I mean, I kind of assumed Gandalf was just kind of all-knowing. Like, he already knew this. And I guess I didn't really catch it until this time. The shock on his face to find out that Sam was with Frodo, I was like, he's not all-seeing. He's not all-knowing. Like, he is fallible, and it's not exactly something any of us really care to admit, but, you know, he's not an all-knowing God.
Yeah, and I like that scene in particular because of how happy he seems when he realizes that Sam is with Frodo.
Yeah.
It kind of gives him hope.
Mm-hmm.
We take that in from him. Even though we already knew that Sam was with Frodo, Gandalf having an extra little pep in his step, finding this out for the first time, kind of makes us think, okay, if Gandalf is happy about this situation, then maybe we should be a little bit more optimistic about where things are going.
Yeah. Just I always picture the wise old wizard. You have Gandalf and you have Dumbledore and they have the answers, you know?
Yeah.
Everything they say is like, that's how it is.
Yeah,
you know,
there's no higher authority.
There's no higher authority, and they're not going to steer us wrong. I don't know. I watched this scene the last time and I'm like, he didn't realize that Sam had gone with Frodo. There's shock on his face. It kind of opened up this in a new light to me. He can make the wrong choices. Like, while the way he is older and he is wiser, at the same time, he's not perfect.
Yeah.
And he can make the wrong choices. Like,
Yeah.
while he still is a good person to follow and take advice from, it's not all knowing advice.
Yeah. It's an interesting facet to his character,
Mhm.
you know, realizing that he's that he's fallible. He's not necessarily human, but
Yeah.
he's a person.
He's not a god.
He's
is a person.
step closer to a god than we are, but he really isn't, especially on Middle Earth in
Mhm.
his physical body.
Before we close out Gandalf, we really need to talk about Shadowfax.
Yes, I love Shadowfax. I'd love to talk about Shadowfax.
I just love how when Gandalf, like, just he whistles for him and all of a sudden this like magical horse basically appears, like almost out of thin air.
Yeah, like this is the Legend of Zelda or something, and you can just whistle and have your horse appear.
Yeah.
Yeah, Shadowfax in the movies feels very mystical, like he's basically the horse god himself. Gandalf calls him the Lord of all horses, and I think some of us took that kind of literally. Oh, he really is like just another being, like he's the Gandalf of horses in a way.
I wonder if it's almost like how I think my dog is the best dog in the whole world. She's the goodest girl in the whole world. He's just like, this is my horse. He is a lord.
Don't think that's how a lot of people interpreted it.
I don't think so either. But Gandalf's just over here gushing about his pet.
In the books, Shadowfax is a little bit different. I mean, Shadowfax is still a phenomenal horse.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they have a word for the type of horse he is. I mean, they say it in the movie, but not being versed in the books, a lot of us are just going to hear that and think, okay, that must be the species of horse he is. You know, like,
that's his breed.
Yeah, or rather, if Aragorn's a human and Gandalf's a wizard, that's a horse and Shadowfax is a whatever this is. Wizards are to humans as Shadowfax is to other horses.
Yeah.
That's, I feel like, the impression that we get in the movies. And that may be kind of apt for the actual lore, but in the books, it doesn't feel like he's quite that mystical. He's still a phenomenal horse, but in the books, Gandalf gets Shadowfax from Rohan.
Yeah.
We're told a story of Gandalf passing through Rohan before the events of the Fellowship setting out on their quest. He stops by to help with something. As a reward, he's given a choice to pick one of the horses from the king's stable, and he picks the best one there. He takes Shadowfax.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess it's technically considered discourteous to take the best one, which, I mean, I kind of get. If you're offered like a selection of something and you take the absolute best one, it's like, okay, I get it, but like, come on.
Yeah.
And I guess Theoden, who was partially under Saruman's control at that point, pretty pissed, but Gandalf did it anyway, and he just dipped out of there on Shadowfax. And it wasn't until he came back after being Gandalf the White and healed Theoden that Theoden was actually like, okay, you can keep Shadowfax, fair trade.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, he's much less mystical in the books,
Mm-hmm.
which is kind of interesting. I kind of prefer the sense of mystery around him in the movies. Like, we're not quite sure where exactly he came from.
Yeah. But while we're on the topic of Rohan right now, the music surrounding Rohan, I know we talked a little bit about music, about the Shire and how unique it is, and you hear the Shire and you're instantly transported there. But the same is exactly true with the music when you hear it from Rohan. It's different than anything else we've heard up until this point.
Yeah.
And I think, in a way, it kind of separates Rohan from the rest of Middle-earth a bit.
Yeah. In the first movie, in the first book, we meet people from not all over Middle-earth, but we meet a lot of members of different nations of Middle-earth. We meet Boromir from Gondor. We get a little taste of Gondor's theme when we meet him. We meet Aragorn, who's also got a little bit of that Gondor theme in his music. We've got the dwarves through Gimli. We've got the elves through Legolas. And then we also meet Galadriel's elves, who have their own tone of music. We meet all these different people in the first movie, and the music creates a feel for each of them that is different and unique. But we hadn't met anyone up to that point from Rohan.
Yeah.
And I love that Howard Shore created something completely different for them. I mean, as he should. I mean, he did for everyone in the first movies. It's just crazy to get to the second film and realize we've got new motifs of music that we're discovering.
Yeah.
It works. Like you said, it's different from anything that we'd heard up to that point.
And it kind of sets the men and the people from Rohan apart.
Yeah.
In a way from the rest of the people in Middle-earth.
I love the music for Rohan.
I do too. It's just so good.
Yeah. The theme of it, it's kind of melancholy, but at the same time, weirdly triumphant.
Yeah.
Like the horns making it feel like this is a victorious nation. Like they're proud and strong. But at the same time, that undercurrent of melancholy, of sadness, kind of hinting that there's something kind of wrong here.
Yeah.
Obviously, Theoden being possessed, then the orcs invading their homeland, being pushed out, having to fall back to Helm's Deep. It's so perfectly crafted. I love it so much.
I do too. And I love the set that they have on that hill for their little kingdom.
Edoras,
yes. And then Helm's Deep. I love how they constructed them. Just amazing.
Yeah, we actually, last time we were together talking about these, we were looking at pictures from the set, and I was telling you about the miniatures that they built for these sets, except they came up with their own term because Peter Jackson very frequently kept telling his props people to make things bigger. And he did this with the miniatures until the miniatures became so big that they came up with a new word. They started calling them bigatures.
Yeah.
The scale model of the bigature for Helm's Deep was a quarter the size of what it actually was supposed to be. That's insane because Helm's Deep is massive.
Yes.
So to make something a quarter that size is still massive.
Yeah, there's a picture of Peter Jackson standing on that bridge that leads into Helm's Deep, and you can see there just how massive it really was.
It's insane.
For a miniature.
Yeah. They did the same thing with Minas Tirith. Minas Tirith is huge. I love hearing about the stories of him telling them just make it bigger, make it bigger.
Yeah.
Kind of getting off topic, going to Return of the King territory real quick, but since we're on the topic of Peter Jackson demanding props to be bigger, I guess this kind of came to a head when they were making the weapon that the Witch King used when he fought Éowyn in the third movie. I mean, we remember that scene of him holding that massive thing on the chain in one hand and a sword in the other, and swinging that around and her blocking it with her shield and it shattering the shield. When they made the prop for that fight, the flail itself, I think they brought it to him at least 4 different times, and each time he said, make it bigger.
I feel like at this point, you should have known already.
Right? And I think in the behind the scenes, they mentioned that. I think they say, like, well, when we first made it, like, we realized he's going to want this big.
Yeah.
So we made it pretty big. And then we brought it to him, and he said, make it bigger.
Oh my gosh.
And we did. And we brought it to him again. And he said, make it a little bigger.
At this point, just make everything giant so you can hear him say, make it smaller.
Yeah. I loved watching the behind the scenes and moments like that, just realizing the things that went into crafting those moments.
And not just crafting them, but creating them, directing them. Like Helm's Deep itself, apparently it was shot for like a month or 2, all at night, under a rain machine. From what I remember you telling me, from what you saw from behind the scenes, it was a pain in the ass. Yeah,
I mean, just 20 hours of footage that they shot over a 4-month period of night shoots with a rain machine pouring on them constantly.
I mean, that sounds awful to me. And I want to thank all of the men and women who stood in the rain every night for 4 months. I want to thank you guys because... Heroes. Yes, you are all unsung heroes because the whole scene, the whole battle of Helm's Deep is just amazing. It's so perfectly done. And it's because of the dedication everybody had to their craft.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite battle scenes in any movie. It's so good. The thought of having to go to work for 4 months at night and stand, I mean, if you're one of the actors playing the orcs, in prosthetics and armor for who knows how many hours a day.
Yeah.
Painful.
Yes, and your clothes just always being soaking and like, I mean, did you ever feel during those 4 months, did any of you ever feel like warm and dry? Like ever? Right. Like, would you wake up in the morning just chilled to the bone? Like, just insane to think about. Yeah,
so we thank you. Thank you for your sacrifice to all those people.
Yep.
While we're on the topic of Rohan, I want to talk about King Theoden. Trying to think about the perspective of the people of Rohan prior to us getting there with Gandalf, Aragorn, Legolas, Gimli. Him being possessed by Saruman and the weird, like, transformation he had to old, crippled Theoden. Like, how long did that process take?
I want to know the same thing. Was it like overnight? Like, was it just this slow, it took several months transformation, so nobody really noticed he was transforming into this, like, crippled old man? Like,
Yeah.
I don't understand. Something is wrong with your king.
Yeah, it had to have taken some time. Logically, it couldn't have happened overnight. Otherwise, they would have been like, okay, something's severely wrong.
Yeah, we should lock him in his chambers for now.
And it had to coincide with Wormtongue showing up and becoming his advisor. In order for it to work, it had to have taken a long, long time. And I'm sure it's mentioned in the book how long Saruman spent
taking over his mind.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I don't remember. It's been a while since I've read them.
But thinking about these scenes, it makes me wonder, like, what was going on inside of Theoden at the time. Was he trapped in a part of his mind watching all of this happen? Or was it more like he was in a sleep and when this veil was lifted, he woke up?
Yeah.
Was he screaming out the whole time or was he sleeping the whole time? And I can't imagine either way coming out of that to find out your child had been killed.
Yeah.
His line, no parent should have to bury their child. I feel his pain in that scene. Like,
Yeah.
At first, obviously, I didn't because I watched it as a teenager. But as a parent, this last time, it was just, so gut-wrenching for me because I was also thinking at the same time, was he screaming out in his mind the whole time for somebody to help him? Or was he, like, in a deep coma?
Yeah. I could not imagine going through that.
Mm-hmm.
Waking up to find his son dead.
There's a scene where he's a little angry. You know, they're discussing what to do, where to go, what should they do. He's woken up to his entire nation in war and disarray, and anybody would be upset at that. He's probably more upset at himself than anybody else. Like, I let it get to this point. But there's this part where Aragorn is trying to help him, and he goes, the last I looked, Theoden, not Aragorn, was king of Rohan. And when I first remember watching this for years, I was like, I mean, it's kind of rude of him to say that. Like, Aragorn's just here to help. Like, you're kind of being a jerk right now. But then I think of his perspective, and like I just said, he was probably very angry with himself. Like, he woke up and now he's in war. Whereas before, if he had had his mind, he might have been able to even stop what was happening to his kingdom before it got to this point. So, I mean, his anger, while maybe at himself and it's being presented towards Aragorn, it might be a little justified.
Yeah, it's fun rewatching these films that we've watched so many times when we were younger, rewatching them now and seeing them from different perspectives. Because, I mean, we kind of had a similar epiphany in Fellowship with Boromir. I mean, originally watching them when we were younger, we're always on Aragorn's side.
Yeah,
and we're like,
always.
you know, anti-Boromir. Like, how dare you stand up to Aragorn? Aragorn's the hero here. And again, here with Theoden.
Exact same thing. Like, Aragorn is just here to help. But Aragorn has had time to adjust the way the world is.
Yeah.
Whereas Theoden is now waking up from who knows how many months of basically being in a coma. And he now has to adjust overnight. Yeah.
It's fun to reappreciate these stories for the quality of writing, realizing that this wasn't written as a world that circulates our key Fellowship characters. Like, the world doesn't revolve around Aragorn.
As much as it has for us for many years, our mind is now opening up to the fact that it doesn't revolve around Aragorn.
These are people that he's interacting with who are full-fleshed humans in and of themselves. They have every right to be upset and angry with our protagonists. As much as we love our protagonists, it works. It feels natural. It feels right.
Yep.
Yeah. Some of the new characters we get in the second book are so good. Theoden's one of them. We get Éomer and Éowyn as well. Just two phenomenal characters.
Speaking of Éomer, still, maybe to this day, I'm very confused as to why he took, how many men was it he was supposed to have taken with him?
Yeah, who knows?
They say a number, but yes, they're all banished from Rohan, right?
Yeah.
But how many of them are there compared to how many of Wormtongue's cronies?
Yeah.
They could have just taken it over. Why did he leave? I still don't understand. Why did he leave when he could have revolted?
I'm sure in terms of, like, the number of soldiers that the Rohirrim have compared to the number of soldiers that were in Edoras that stayed under Wormtongue's control. I would imagine the numbers kind of added up a bit in the books. Then again, I don't know if they actually get into that stuff in the books. I don't remember. But it is strange to think about. Because, I mean, they do end up with a fair host of soldiers on their travels to Helm's Deep. But I think a fair number of those soldiers came from surrounding villages and stuff as well. So it had to be quite a unbalanced in terms of weaponry and soldiers,
Yeah.
comparing the Rohirrim to what was left in Edoras.
Yeah.
So they could have feasibly just kicked Wormtongue out.
That's how I feel. I mean, like, this is a nation that, like, even trains their women how to fight.
Yeah.
So when it comes down to it, lock the Mad King in his chamber, and you're now acting king for a minute.
Yeah, right? Yeah. So potentially a little bit of a plot hole. Whether that plot hole is addressed in the books or not, I don't remember. But
yeah,
regardless, it's one of the few moments in the movies where we're watching and it's like, you got your men, you could fight back.
Right,
like,
seriously.
Surely.
How many orc did you kill in, an hour or two where Merry and Pippin were? Like, you guys would have been fine. But maybe it was out of respect for his uncle that he chose not to fight. I don't know. So maybe we're not looking at it the right way. I'm still just confused. You didn't have to kill your uncle. You didn't even have to kill the guards. You just banished the guards who were following Wormtongue, put your uncle in a room.
Yep, but Wormtongue was clever. He got Theoden to sign a kingly writ banishing him.
Mm-hmm.
And considering the pluck of the average soldier, I would imagine very few of them are willing to go against something that their king commands, even if their king has been sick for quite a while.
Yeah, that's true.
We can reason our way to seeing through the perspective of the people in those situations and understanding why they didn't revolt or even why they thought that wouldn't work. So there's enough pieces there to be like, okay, that's fine. But it's still a little bit like, didn't even try.
Right. I mean, you just left your sister, who you're just trying to protect, alone with this creep. Like,
yeah, right?
I mean, you at least could have taken her with you. She wouldn't have left, but...
Speaking of Aylmer, though, Carl Urban, the actor who plays him...
Yes.
He's such a good actor.
So good.
I love him so much.
He's a freaking chameleon.
It's crazy to compare his roles to each other, to put them side by side. Because, I mean, there are a few... When I was younger, still trying to piece them together, where I'm watching a movie, I'm like, man, this guy's kind of an interesting character. I like this guy. And then I'll look at the IMDb. I'm like, wait a minute, what?
Right? I had a similar experience when watching that new Star Trek with Chris Pine, trying to, like, figure out who is this actor, Bones. Like, he's so familiar to me. And then when I finally pulled up the IMDb, I'm like, no, it's not. No, it's not. Like, I had to put, like, side-by-side comparisons. I'm like, maybe it is. But, like, I mean, it obviously, it is. But it's just the way he can mold himself into these characters is just insane to me.
Yeah. Real quick, you said in that new Star Trek, that movie came out in 2009. It was almost 15 years ago.
Well, I wanted, because there's so many versions of Star Trek.
No, I know.
I wanted to make it very clear that it was the newer version of Star Trek.
I know, but there are potentially people listening to this
thinking, oh, there's a new Star Trek movie.
Yeah, thinking there's a new Star Trek movie, realizing, oh wait, you're talking about the one that came out when I was 5 years old.
Yeah, see, no, when you hit a certain age, time means nothing anymore.
Yeah.
2009 was yesterday.
Yeah, everything that happens from when you turn 20 on, you know, it all happened within the same week.
Exactly. Exactly.
It's like, that was like what, like last year? That was 2 decades ago. What do you mean? Show me a calendar.
Yes. Sometimes I still think I'm that, like, 20-year-old. And then I look at pictures from 15 years ago and I'm like, oh, no, I'm not. I feel like that 20-year-old, but I don't look like that 20-year-old.
Yeah. Scrolling through TikTok and watching videos of young kids say things like, this is what your parents' radio sounded like back in the year 2000. I'm like,
wait, 2000 was like a month ago, right?
Yeah. It's like, what do you mean? Your parents' radio? Like, we're the same age, kid.
Exactly. Yes, the same age.
Like, what are you talking about?
We were all there for 2000, okay? What? Okay, just happened.
Yeah, what do you mean, your radio from 2000? Yeah. What do you mean you were born in 2003? Oh, yeah, I just...
That was a wonderful tangent.
Existential crisis about aging aside, Carl Urban is a phenomenal actor.
Oh, he really is. And how is it he gets better with age? I pulled up a picture of him on IMDb the other day and was like, how is he more handsome now than he was as a young man? Like, he still looks like a young man. Yeah,
I love his sort of gruff look.
Yes.
From
oh my gosh,
The
I
Boys,
love it.
the show The Boys. Yeah.
I haven't seen that one, but I have seen pictures of him and he looks amazing.
And his character in that is so different from Éomer. It's crazy. The accent alone. 2 completely different voices. I mean, physically and vocally, he really is a chameleon. I mean, he changes so vastly between roles. It's insane. I love it.
Yes, I like his role in Thor Ragnarok because it's probably one of my favorite Marvel movies of all time. And so I love that he's in it. And his role in that is just, it's so different. I mean, he's a warrior, right? But he's so silly at the same time.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. I love it.
Yeah. Speaking of Ragnarok, there's a little Easter egg in that movie. So one of his older roles, he played in the live action adaptation of the video game Doom.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember if he was the antagonist or the protagonist. I saw it a long time ago. I don't remember, but it was one of his earlier roles. They actually make a reference to Doom in Thor Ragnarok.
Do they really?
Yeah, so the original game has a protagonist of Doom standing on the top of this hill holding two guns, pointing down, shooting aliens or monsters or something. And in Ragnarok, there's that scene where he's holding his two M16s and he jumps out of the ship and on top of a pile of monsters and he's just pointing them down in the same posture as the guy on the cover of Doom shooting the monsters.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, it's really fun. I didn't draw the connection the first time I'd seen the movie because I'd forgotten that he was in the Doom movie. But yeah, I sometime last year saw a little side-by-side comparison of that shot in the video game and it's like, oh, that's really fun.
It is fun. I love that they did that.
Anyway, back to Rohan. Back to Middle Earth.
Sometimes I forget what we're even talking about. So I'm thankful for our notes.
Yeah, well, even with our notes, we've gone on several tangents. They're only so effective.
So maybe we should move away from Éomer before we
keep talking about
Karl Urban, and we'll move on to Éowyn.
Yeah, Éowyn. I love Éowyn. She's such a good character.
She really is. Yeah. She has so much heart.
Mm-hmm. Her little romance with Aragorn, quote unquote romance.
Yeah.
One of my least favorite aspects of the films because it's, I mean, as a viewer, it's awkward. I mean, because you know from Aragorn's perspective that he's in love with Arwen and that he's quite a bit older than Éowyn, and saying those two names really close together, it's kind of interesting that two of Tolkien's like three female characters in the books have names that close, that similar to each other. Anyway, not getting into that because that's a whole podcast discussion in and of itself. But yeah, from the viewer's perspective, it's one of the more uncomfortable aspects of the story. She's got a really good story. You know, her setting off in secret in the third movie, the third book, to go fight alongside the men, her determination to try and fight in the second book, but sort of giving in and realizing, you know, maybe I can help in other ways still. I love her journey.
Yes.
So it's always a little bit frustrating when those journeys are sort of punctuated by a character's desire to be in a relationship with someone who doesn't want to also be in that relationship.
Yes, because how I've always looked at it is Aragorn just looks at her like a friend.
Yeah.
And like he talks to her like he does to Legolas and Gimli, like honestly, there's really no difference. But you can see when she talks to him, it's way different than when she talks to anybody else. And so, yes, it does make it awkward. It's like, stop, just stop. Let's not do this right now. Definitely could have done without it in the movie. But at the same time, it makes when she meets Faramir a little sweeter.
Yeah, and it's fair. It's just in terms of stories in general, where there aren't too many female characters, it's always a little bit frustrating when they're the ones that a potential romance is centered around. Like, they're always the romance interest or object. It's like, why can't we just have a badass female character kicking some butt?
She can fight. She wants to fight. Can't we just focus around that?
Yeah, like Legolas, the entire 3 movies, no talk of any sort of emotional romantic interest there. Same with Gimli, even though he jokes about dwarven women.
Yeah.
At one point, there are plenty of male characters who that's not even an aspect to their arcs. And same thing for plenty of other movies and books out there as well. So it's kind of frustrating when we only get a handful of female characters and it feels like each of them, save for Galadriel, is some sort of romantic interest. Then again, Galadriel, she's on another level. I mean, it's
really
it's hard to even remember that she's married half the time.
I mean, I didn't even realize she was the first time I watched the movie. I didn't know who that man was next to her. I thought it was like some like advisor.
Yeah, I love the memes that have come out about Celeborn since the Rings of Power.
Yes, when she in the Rings of Power when she's like her husband's dead, Celeborn, and I was like, wait what?
He's really not though. He's out there.
Yes, there's some amazing memes.
If you ever feel useless, remember that Galadriel had a husband. I love it.
Perfect.
Oh.
But Éowyn, there's a specific scene I've always loved, and it's that soup scene.
Where
she's made a little soup for everyone, you know?
Yeah.
And she's like walking around trying to give it to them. But I just recently found out that, you know, it was kind of just added in, and it was a joke towards the catering company who had provided them with this awful soup, and nobody liked it. Everybody hated it. And so they threw it in the movie. Like, that was legit soup from the catering company that they were going and passing around. Nobody liked it.
Oh, I love that.
I know. I remember reading that. I just laughed so hard.
That is so funny.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I'm trying to think of that scene, because that scene is mainly Eowyn realizing how old Aragorn is.
Yeah.
So to take that scene and add an extra layer to it,
yeah,
the whole soup aspect,
yeah,
that's very clever.
Yes, it is.
Because it's seamless. Like, we don't even think about it.
No, we don't. Like, they were just having a conversation and the soup was a part of it. Nobody wants the soup.
I love that. That is so clever.
Thought it was great.
There's one other Rohan-specific character that I want to talk about real quick.
Who?
Brago.
Oh, yes. He doesn't get enough credit for his performance.
He's such a good boy.
He is a good boy.
He's such a good boy. For those who don't remember who Brago is, he's the horse. We're not talking about some random soldier who's a good boy.
No, when they're all packing up to leave for Helm's Deep, they're, trying to get the horses all saddled and everything. And we're in the stable with them and we see this brown horse basically throwing a fit, kicking up his hooves, trying to get away, trying to break free. And that's when Aragorn speaks to him and calms his mind and is like, he's seen too much battle. You need to let him go. That's Brago.
Yeah, the horse to the king's son.
Yes.
To Theoden's son. It's fascinating to consider the ramifications of war to more than just the people who fight in it. Horses were a huge part of war, obviously in Lord of the Rings, but even in actual history.
Mm-hmm. They are intelligent creatures.
They are. They really are. And I can't think of too many stories out there where we actually dive into the mental health of a horse. I mean, I know there are a few movies. I think The Horse Whisperer kind of gets into, there's an actual horse who was in a car accident.
And he suffers from PTSD.
Yeah. And then there's also the movie War Horse, which I haven't seen, but it's apparently gut-wrenching at the end.
Oh, yeah. Then I won't be watching that one. No, thank you.
But yeah, I love that they touch on that. This is a war vet right here, and he's seen some shit.
Yeah.
So I love Brago.
He was actually set to retire after filming this movie.
Yeah.
And Viggo Mortensen adopted him.
I love that. I love that so much.
Yeah. He had grown so close to him during filming that I think in his mind he couldn't even imagine walking off set without this horse.
Yeah. How often do you hear about that? Someone purchasing their
coworker?
Their co-star.
Gosh, I didn't even think of it that way. Why do you do this to me?
I'm just imagining The Rock and Kevin Hart.
No.
Only because Kevin Hart's small and The Rock is massive.
Oh my gosh. No. Okay, we need to get away from this train of thought right now.
Oh, this is so silly.
No, but he was such a good actor. And I think that going back to the character himself, the reason, he goes to find Aragorn and chooses to be with Aragorn was not because, how he spoke to him in Elvish and everything, but because they kind of connected and he understood his pain. And by letting him go, I don't know, they formed some kind of a connection. They weren't he wasn't forcing him to work with him. It was now his choice. Yeah,
there was an understanding there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I love that. I didn't even consider that. But yeah, the fact that Brago chose to come back and fight with Aragorn.
Yeah.
I love that aspect of that character.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know we already talked about Gollum a little bit, but I think we should go back to him and his journey with Sam and Frodo.
Yeah. In the books, that's basically 50% of the pages.
Exactly.
It's split between Aragorn, Gimli, Legolas, and Sam and Frodo and Gollum.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's this scene at the beginning. Gollum tries to attack them, and then they capture him and put the rope around him. And this is now where they're deciding, are we going to trust him to be our guide? And Frodo asks him, you know the way to Mordor. You've been there before. And they were posed as a question, but they were said as a statement. And in my mind, I was thinking, it's almost as he's daring Gollum to deny it.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like a test for him right now. If he denies knowing the way to Mordor, that he has been there before, then, I can't trust him as my guide. Because he doesn't know that I know that he's been there. So let's just, I'm going to give him a little test right now.
Yeah, and it's kind of fun to see Frodo be a bit more assertive, because quite often he's very soft-spoken and he's a very gentle character.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting to see moments like that from him. We see him as the ring bearer, as the quote-unquote leader of this chapter of the Fellowship, and to take command like that. It's very interesting. And I kind of love that we get a little glimpse of that side of Frodo in that scene.
Yeah, especially before the ring really starts to wear him down.
Yeah.
And while as an audience, we kind of see the way Sam does in a way where, don't fully trust him, but I don't know, the way Sam treats Gollum, how he calls him names, and he's very rude to him. And I know he wasn't privy to the whole conversation that Gollum had with himself as Smeagol, and where he kind of banished Gollum. I know he wasn't privy to that. Only us as an audience were. But at the same time, I'm like, it's kind of obvious that he is trying. And Sam just doesn't give him any leeway. And it kind of bugs me a little bit.
Yeah, it can be a little frustrating. We love Sam, so it's hard to be upset with him.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
But in those early moments of the Two Towers, there are moments when we're like, come on, just take it easy.
Yeah.
Don't beat him down. But at the same time, it's hard to blame him. He knows on a certain level that Gollum cannot be trusted.
Yeah.
And he knows why Gollum is there.
And he is right.
Yeah.
But I also wonder if the change in Gollum would have solidified a little more if he had someone who had his back. Frodo was kind and understanding and trusted him and even called him Smeagol. Didn't even call him Gollum, called him Smeagol. But then there was Sam always calling him Gollum and beating him back down. I wonder if Sam and Frodo had his back together, if the outcome would have been a little different.
Yeah, but that said, makes me wonder if Smeagol had been, in a way, healed through that, and if Gollum had stayed gone, what actually would have happened when they got to Mount Doom?
Yeah, I mean, we needed Gollum, not Smeagol, at the end. Obviously, everything that happened needed to happen because of how
the wheel weaves as the wheel wills.
Oh my gosh, you have not even read that book. You do not get... No. I'm really upset with you right now. I can't even get you to read that book.
What? It's so... That's a different conversation, all right? We can get into it.
He just quoted The Wheel of Time, if anybody is wondering.
It's a lot, Jess. It's a
so
lot.
Good, though.
One day I will do it. It's not written off completely in my book.
Okay, I'm glad to hear it. Don't watch the Amazon show.
I wasn't planning on it, honestly. But going back to Sam and Frodo, I feel like a lot of their portions of the story are scenes of them just sort of trudging through Middle-earth, trying to get from point A to point B, punctuated with scenes of Gollum doing or saying things, or them interacting with various peoples in Middle-earth, you know, whether that be the Rangers from Gondor or the orcs in Mordor. But there are certain scenes between the two of them that I love seeing, and those are the softer scenes where we see that these two people, Frodo and Sam, are actually good friends and they care about each other, and there's some actual love there between the two of them. The moment at the end of the second movie, when Frodo refers to Sam as Samwise the Brave, and Sam, he kind of smiles a bit, and he
says, "Don't make fun, I was being serious."
Yeah, and Frodo says, "So was I," and they keep walking, and Sam kind of gets an extra little pep in his step.
Yeah, and you can tell he's just very pleased by the remark.
Yeah, just moments like that. I love it. Just so
because
good.
In the third movie, we don't get really any of those interactions anymore. Maybe a little towards the end.
Yeah.
When everything's said and done. But it just becomes so dark and so heavy in the next movie between the two of them that this little scene, this little, I don't know, ray of light is just kind of nice. And speaking of their scenes, there's one specific scene in this movie. And honestly, I will say that it's my favorite monologue in the entire trilogy. I always think of it, and no matter how many times I hear it, it will bring me to tears. Like, not full on crying, but my eyes will fill.
Yeah.
It's the scene when they are in Osgiliath.
Yes.
And when the Rangers of Gondor are trying to take them back to the Steward of Gondor. And Frodo says, "I can't do this anymore, Sam." And Sam sympathizes with him and says they probably shouldn't even be there. And then he goes on to say, "It's like in the great stories, Mr. Frodo. The ones that really mattered. Full of darkness and danger they were. And sometimes you didn't want to know the end. Because how could the end be happy? How could the world go back to the way it was when so much bad had happened? But in the end, it's only a passing thing, this shadow. Even the darkness must pass. A new day will come, and when the sun shines, it will shine out the clearer. Those were the stories that stayed with you, that meant something, even if you were too small to understand why. But I think, Mr. Frodo, I do understand. I know now. Folk in those stories had lots of chances of turning back, only they didn't. They kept going, because they were holding on to something." Frodo asks what they're holding on to, and Sam replies that there is some good in this world, Mr. Frodo, and it is worth fighting for.
I love that monologue so much. I love Sean Astin's delivery of it.
He does so good.
Like you said, it brings tears to my eyes every time I watch it. And as someone who's personally not very physically inclined, like in terms of like hugging, things like that, this scene to me, every time I watch it, the feelings I get from it are what I imagine being hugged feels like to someone who does love hugs.
Yes.
Like it's that warmth, that sort of comfort.
No, it
that you
truly
get from
is.
someone else.
Yes, like I'm not a hugger either, but when it comes to my children, I love nothing more than a hug. And when they just wrap their arms around me, yes, it's the same feeling.
Yeah, I love this scene. As we delve deeper into the darkness of the story and get closer and closer to Mordor, the sense of darkness and desperation grows. And so moments like this that sort of just bring us out of it a little bit.
Yeah.
It's so good. Punctuation marks in the story that just stand out.
And like bringing it a little more real world is someone who suffers from depression and has literally said, I can't do this anymore. This whole thing just fills me with a little bit of hope that the sun will shine again. Everything will be better. And if you make it through this dark time, if you can do it, you'll be that much happier and that much stronger. And I always am. Every single time that I'm able to make it through the dark times, through those clouds, those moments where I don't know if I can go on anymore, I'm always so much happier on the other side that I was able to pull through this darkness. And I also kind of wonder, because after this kind of cleared away some of the ring's effects just for that little moment, because then we have that talk of Samwise the Brave after, and we see a little bit more of the Frodo that we knew before. And I'm wondering if the effects of the ring kind of just push back a little bit.
I kind of like that theory.
I mean, even Gollum looked a little hopeful afterwards.
There's this quote from Gandalf in the Hobbit films. I don't know if it's something that actually came from the books or if it was something that they wrote, but it actually connects to this very well. The quote is, Saruman believes it is only great power that can hold evil in check. But that is not what I have found. I found it is the small, everyday deeds of ordinary folk that keep the darkness at bay. Small acts of kindness and love. And I think that's a comment not only on literally acts of kindness and love, making people happy, bringing them out of their darkness, but I think in terms of the world of Middle-earth, I think he's kind of insinuating that is sort of a counter-toxin, if you will, to the effects of Sauron and Mordor and evil in general. Evil magic being countered by literal acts of kindness and love. And I kind of love that, if that's actually legit, because that makes things like kindness and love feel like magic in a way.
And what's not love but what Sam just did here for Frodo? You know, he wanted to give up in this moment, and Sam, just with his actions and his words, boosted Frodo up a little bit.
Yeah, it's such a phenomenal moment. And right at the end of the second movie, when we're heading into the darkest parts of the story for the next film, just brings us right back up, positions us, if you will, for the downhill journey that we're about to head on.
Some of the hardest moments we're about to have with these characters.
Yeah, I love it so much. It solidifies Sam in my books as one of my favorite characters in fantasy.
I feel like a lot of people take Sam for granted, and this just shows that there's more to Sam than meets the eye.
Yeah.
And that brings us to the end of episode 3, and I want to thank everybody for joining us.
Yeah, thank you guys. Hope you tune in next time. We're probably going to jump straight into Return of the King rather than bounce back to the Stormlight Archive. So we're going to finish up Lord of the Rings with episode 4 and take it from there.
So we'll see you next time.
Goodbye.
Bye.